can I encourage colleagues to take their seats, please? Thank you. Okay. Well, yes, we are ready to start. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your, it was a very welcome cup of tea, I have to say. So I'd like to now introduce Willem van Valkenburg, who is the Executive Director of the Extension School at TU Delft. And he's continuing this theme of post-COVID transformation, and he's going to talk about blended education. So hopefully, all fingers crossed, or whatever your local expression is, this will work.
Welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Willem. The floor is yours.
Great. So unfortunately, I couldn't be there with you. I would have preferred, I think, the weather in Italy above the weather in the Netherlands. It's all rainy. So today I'm going to talk about blended education, and yeah, for me, I was looking back at this, and in October of 2019. I presented at this conference about the embed model, and I was also showing what my university was doing. So I thought it was interesting to see what happened in the last 2 years at my university, and what we did to improve it. And I see my name is up there. If it was possible to share my video, then you would also see me. And so I can continue. The screen changed. So
are we able to get Willem's picture? And didn't we have some slides before? Yeah, we seemed. Oh, okay, okay. So we're not seeing you yet, Willem, but hopefully we will shortly.
So I can't turn on my video because it's disabled. I have shared my slides.
Okay, Willem, do you want to share your slides? I think that's probably the best option to take.
Yeah, I did share my slides. I can do it again. Stop and reshare. Here you see my slides now.
This looks like it might be right. So yes. Yeah. Definitely. Okay, go ahead. We're working quick while we're ahead.
While it's working. As I was saying, in October 2019, I presented about the embed model, and now I was looking back at what did we do in the last 2 years. So of course, in March 2019, we suddenly had to switch to full online remote education, as all universities had to do. And especially what we've seen is that meant for a lot of teachers some phases they had to go through, from help, I can't do this, to oh my god, I pulled it off, and some say this worked better than before, I'm not going back. And then it continued and continued, and we're still in an not post-COVID period, but we're looking towards it. And yeah, what happened at the universities? In the beginning, it was of course empty classrooms, and now they're filled again, this overview gives a nice about the transitions that we are going through. And I think what we're now looking towards is what's the emerging of the new normal. And I think that the important thing is, yeah, we don't know, and we have to figure it out. That means every university has to figure it out for themselves, what will stick and what will get rid of. So what will be the new normal? And if I look at my university, I saw these things. So first of all, the fear of technology has gone away. Everyone is used to Zoom, to MS Teams, and all of other things. So that really helps. We definitely see a lot of blended or hybrid classroom learning. We see new forms of assessment and new ways of collaboration. And today I want to focus on mostly on the second one, but a little bit about the new fear of technology is that will be an enormous enabler. When we were started with blended learning, there was always the fear of using the technology, and I've seen now so many teachers who, for them, it's so natural now to do in Teams or in Zoom call with the whole class, and that is an enormous enabler for blended learning and online learning. So my idea is that blended learning will become the new normal. And then, yeah, what are we talking about blended learning? It's finding the right mix between classroom teaching and online learning. And what's important there is that we are making a deliberate choice of how do you integrate those two things. And I think that's also was part of the Embed project, is really making deliberate choices, what you do in a classroom and what you do online. If we look at the Embed project and the maturity model, then we have 3 levels, and I think a lot of you have seen it, but to be sure, I have it. So it starts, of course, with teaching and learning within a course or a program, and we call that a micro level. Then we have the conditions and the policies on the meso level, the institute, and then you have rules and regulations and policy on the macro level, government and society. And today I will focus on the institute. That was the question from George to focus on. And then if you look at the meso level, we have 8 dimensions, and I will go through them and tell a little bit what we're doing at Delft about it. So first is institutional strategy, and here you have the 3 levels that you can have. And my university already in 2019, it was part of our strategic framework that blended learning was the way forward. So it was already here, and it's actually, we're currently in the process of reviewing our strategic framework after COVID, and blended learning is still one of the key priorities for teaching and learning and in our strategic framework. So it continues to be like that. That's good. If we look at institutional support, so how does our university support teachers and students in blended learning activities? We also have the 3 levels, so limited support, dedicated support, and strategic support. And before COVID, we were on level 2. There was some dedicated support for blended learning, but not a lot. And actually during the COVID, we actually started a new team, and we have now a team of 9 dedicated persons who are working on blended learning. It's fully integrated in our teaching and learning support services, and it's here to stay. It has continuous funding from our executive board. So we really went up a level to the strategic level here. A little bit more detail is that we have 8 faculties in our universities, and there is a dedicated learning developer for blended learning for each faculty, and they work together as a team So they create training, courses, materials that they use at the different faculties, so that all faculties have the same level of support for blended learning. And if we look at sharing and communities, also here the 3 levels, we were at level 2. So there were some communities, and actually with the start of the new blended learning team, we actually are moving now towards level 3. We're not fully there yet, but we're moving up, and that's because of that team is picking this up and organizing these events and making sure that everywhere we're talking about blended education. If we look at professional development, then when before COVID we were on level 2, and actually COVID has helped to move us towards level 3. It's now blended learning is now fully part of our university teaching qualification program. We develop a lot of new training for blended education. We haven't succeeded in including the recognition and valuing in our system at the university for teachers. So we're still working on that. And of course, we are participating in the Digital Pro project. I think one of the previous presenters already presented about it, and of course we'll offer these trainings also to our own teachers and support staff. If we look at the quality assurance dimension, we were at level 1. It was completely not part of our quality assurance process if a course was blended or a program was blended. And we made a little bit progress. So there are some special processes set up now for blended courses and programs, and some research, but still in the early phases of level 2. But we're moving, and that's, I think, good to hear. If we look at the governance, then we were at level 1, ad hoc. So it was not part of a regular governance processes at our university, and actually now it is much more part of that. It's actually a regular topic in our Director of Education meetings. It's part of our discussions that our executive board has with the deans. And the new blended learning team is developing different kinds of models that are shared within the university. So moving in a good direction there. Then looking at finance, before COVID we were level 2, so it means there were projects around blended learning, and with the start of the new blended learning team, we actually moved into level 3. It is now a part of our teaching and learning support, and it will be, and it has a regular funding. It's not based on project funding. Then going to facilities, we were already doing quite well with the facilities, and we were already on strategic level. What we did see is that during this COVID time, there's more focus on hybrid learning. So a lot of the facilities or rooms in our building are now set up in a hybrid way. And of course, COVID also organized that we are re-evaluating the different tools we have and how well they behave, how well we can support them, and if they are still fitting the needs of our teachers. And we already were doing that, but now I think we have a stronger view on what we need as a university for this. So these were the 8 levels, and if you then compare between 2019 and this year, so this was 2019, and then this is now, and you see that we are expanded area quite a bit. So we really use the time to make steps and to improve blended learning, and to prepare our university as a whole for blended learning in a good way. We're not there yet, still work to be done. And what's for me important, a couple of things that I want to highlight here. The first one is really there is a willingness to change. And that was, of course, in the beginning forced by COVID. But now I notice that a lot more teachers are open to change, and also our management team has seen, hey, we can do a lot more, can do things differently. It doesn't have to stay the same. And that is from getting away from the 3-hour written closed book exams to the by default teaching in a classroom for 300 students. There is really a willingness to change and to see what works best. So we should use that willingness, and now it's there. I think it's important for all universities to look at, use that momentum of COVID to make some structural improvements. So it's really easy to stay into the emergency situation and to see, hey, we fix it for now. But it is also important to look at where are we going, and to look at, can we structurally change this and make improvements to our education and to the facilities and everything around it. So use that momentum. At least in my university, there was some extra also funding for COVID. So we had also, that was a great opportunity to do things. And then what we see is that a lot of teachers want to use the COVID experience to improve their courses. And the challenge is, of course, to facilitate them and to help them the right way. And I think the important thing there is that they need time to adjust. And a lot of teachers has done extremely a lot of work in the last year and a half, and I think they also need some time to just relax and get back to a normal life, and so you shouldn't push too hard to get it all done by this year. And the last one, I think that this whole transformation into the new normal is much more challenging than the whole emergency transition we did last year. And it will take more time and more effort, but we shouldn't waste the momentum that's there. So by that, I would like to finish my presentation.
Thank you very much.
Open for questions.
Thank you, Willem. I think it was really interesting that you reflected something that Josie had pointed out in her earlier talk about it being more difficult to transition into the new normal, into the recovery, than actually coping with the pandemic. But I also think what you did for us there was to give a really excellent run through of how embed can be so useful in helping institutions work out where they are and what they need to do. And I thought it was particularly interesting to show how the COVID had helped you to move from the position you were in to, further along that journey. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think we've got time for a few questions, if you're happy to take some and there are any questions.
Yes.
Anybody have a question? And I think, oh yes, we got one down there, Alessandra. Thank you. Just waiting for the microphone.
Hello, Willem. This is Christopher from University of Southern Denmark. I just wonder, you talked about rules and regulation and governance, and my question is related to, have you some experience with teachers who want to do something that they cannot do because of the rules and regulation? I mean, if they want to do some online activities that is normally not allowed, but was allowed during the COVID-19.
Did you catch that? Okay, Willem.
I've heard the question, and what's interesting, I now focus on the institute, but of course, also on the macro level of the embed, you see that there in some countries are limitations on blended learning that are really in the way. And one is, for example, that some teachers are paid based on their hours in the classroom. And of course, during COVID, a new situation started, and I don't know how that will solve. But you should use that momentum in your country to see, can we continue to do based on the number of hours the student is doing, or how much time you spend on it, and not get back to, hey, it has to be in the classroom again. We don't have that limitation in the Netherlands, so that's not a problem for us. But we are in discussion, of course, with our Ministry of Education on funding and other activities that are sometimes limiting for our university and for blended education.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay, any other questions? No, I think your presentation was so clear and compelling that people are just thinking about what they've learned there, and hopefully we're going to see lots more people picking up on the embed model as a consequence. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Well, apologies for the time you spent hanging around, and it's a shame that you can't be with us in person, but hopefully next time we will see you in person. So thank you once again. Shall we just thank Willem once again? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in next year.
So do we. Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're now moving on to considering online and distance education in that post-COVID transformation. And I'd like to welcome Silvia Silveira, who is the director at the eLearn Centre at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. Excuse my accent if I got that all wrong, but
Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio. After too many months living professional life in 2 dimensions, only in front of a screen, it is a great pleasure to be here today with all 5 senses. This is my first professional trip outside of Spain, and since the start of the pandemic, and coming to Italy for this conference makes me doubly happy. So first of all, thanks to the organization for inviting me, and grazie mille Vari for the orecchietti that we ate yesterday. It is also my first congress as director of the UOX eLearn Innovation Center, a position that I have held since last March. So I have allowed myself a kind of lateral and unorthodox approach to this presentation. I hope you understand it is a creative provocation which can encourage further reflections. Footnote: since 2006 I am a creativity teacher, and I understand provocations as a creative techniques that allow us to imagine future scenarios and new roles in online and distant education. It works? It doesn't work? Ah, here. Sorry. Some weeks ago, I read in the press an interview to the American anthropologist, biologist, neuroscientist Melvin Kuhner about the Spanish translation of his book, Women After All. Kuhner explained that he often asks his students this provocative question. Is man like a virus? Thank you. The answer is, he cannot make a new life without borrowing the productive machinery of another organism. And following Kuhner's provocation, we could open a thread of similar questions in relation to education and university. Oh, the virus. Are students like a virus? They cannot lead an academic life without borrowing the machinery of knowledge from teachers. And further, is the university like a virus? It cannot carry out its life and fulfill its transformative function without a close, intimate relationship with the complex ecosystem that surrounds it of corporation, industry, governments, all society. Let's go to the starting point. A virus has changed our lives, as well as the life of higher education and distance and online education. What do we imagine the future of online and distance education from the perspective of another type of virus? Forget for a while the biological virus we have lived with and still live with during these 2 years. Let's also move away from computer viruses that have some point been able to attack our devices. We are talking about another type of virus, a more benevolent one, those of the so-called viral marketing, which get users of digital social networks to share content that interests them organically, often spontaneously, challenging the barriers of space, time, idiomatics, with a potential of planetary reach and very high engagement. Here you have one of the seminal definitions of viral marketing by Dr. Wilson in the online context. I spent several years of my life researching the creative keys of marketing, of viral marketing, and as the points come together in life, I would now like to share with you some of these keys applied to the world of online and distant education. Because what if virtual and distant universities go viral? Let me show firstly and very quickly 3 higher education digital campaigns that are good examples to understand the metaphor and the key concepts that I want to explain to you today. The first one, the University of Nevada brought history back to life by creating Facebook and Twitter accounts for 2 of the 2 most memorable students, Leola Lewis and her husband, Joe McDonald's. Through regular updates and including personal photos and diary entries, students could witness their story and therefore the history of the university. It was a good way to give information getting the attention of the students, keeping it interactive and friendly. The second one, while the Open University's students are hugely diverse, a single thread runs through each of their stories: ambition. Appealing to aspirational opportunities that can change life for the better was the way to engage students emotionally. And the last one, the University of Tennessee tagged the celebrity Dolly Parton to promote their upcoming history course. The popular singer retweeted the message to all of her more than 5 million followers, and thus provoked an outburst of responses, interviews, and press coverage. Now comes my provocative question. How could these three creative drivers underlined in these examples also be strategic drivers to connect with online and distance education students in post-COVID era? Emotion, fun, in different types of humor, and information, value contents, were three of the three drivers that I found in my thesis research as the most critical to assure the spread of messages through social media. Let's start with information. It is the knowledge that we are going to share with the students so that they can assimilate it, apply it to solving problems or professional challenges, and gradually acquire skills. It is a knowledge resulting from research whose results are increasingly open and shareable. Yes, they can go viral, spread, and reach a larger population. In Spain, for example, the commitment of universities to open science is consolidating, and there are already more documents in open access, more than 61%, than in restricted access. In an article published last weekend, our Vice President, Pastora Martinez, who is also attending this Congress, highlighted one of the phenomena that has occurred in the academy during the pandemic, the acceleration of the generation and transfer of knowledge. In fact, it was a kind of meta-viral phenomenon, and thanks to this, we can be here today. In virtual classrooms and beyond, there is more information and knowledge than ever before, contents that circulate faster than ever. To avoid infoxication, infodemic, and paradoxical effects of this information, to avoid this, the guidance and accompaniment of the virtual or distant teachers makes even more sense. In 2019, we began a process of total transformation of all subjects of the U-OC. We went from a model focused on resources, on information, on basically textual content, to a model focus on the activity that the student must carry on. Now, the teacher first designs the learning challenges, taking into account the competences that must be worked on, and then looks for or creates the content that it's need to solve the challenge. During content curation, the teacher takes into account the time spent viewing or reading the resources, and of course, the time necessary to solve the activity. The U-OC's resource catalog includes a wide typology of formats: videos, podcasts, infographics, didactic novels, serious games, digital books, monographics collections. But we tend to use information and knowledge formats that are more encapsulated, brief, consumable through any device and screen size. In the 17th century, the Czech pedagogue and philosopher Comenius already spoke of the need to structure content and adapt it to the cognitive process of the students. A century later, however, the Swiss Pestalozzi advocated active learning. In some way, the resource model of our virtual university combines and evolves what both innovations were, because it empowers students to be responsible for their learning process. It also allows the teacher to focus on formative assessment through their learning process. Let's move to onto emotion. According to the trend reports that we handle in the Learn Innovation Center of the university, the students are increasingly demanding and dynamic. They want to be managers of their time, decide how much time to dedicate to their training, and accelerate their studies. Therefore, the experience of their university career will be different from what it was until now. Online and distance education models that are already student-centered or students' learning activity-centered will focus even more on the students' experience and emotional connections. Remember, we remember what we feel, we learn what we remember. During the pandemic, virtual students have suffered less than face-to-face students from pedagogical, technological, and infrastructure problems and changes, but they have not escaped emotional and affective contingencies. One of the pillars of our online model has always been the network of teachers, fellow students, management technicians, tutors that surrounds the students throughout their studies, but until now, in fact, it was a functional, motivational social network. The university made the deadlines for delivery of learning activities more flexible. We modified the evaluation models and carried out all internships online. But was all this emotional enough? Thinking about the well-being of students means thinking about their physical health, but also about the socio-emotional dimension to improve their university experience, keep them connected to learning, and also prevent dropping out of studies. If emotion, positive or negative, but necessarily intense, as advocate Jonah Berger in this book, is a key driver for a social vital process, we need to more about the mood of the students. In this sense, an investigation is currently undertaken in our university in which we ask student volunteers to review in a totally anonymized way a sample of the emails they write or receive and to tell us what they felt when writing or reading them. Beyond the pandemic effect, the Pygmalion Effect can influence the performance of some students because they believe they cannot pass a subject. Quite often, a good student fails the same subject repeatedly because he or she considers that he is not qualified to pass it. This stress affects in his or her academic performance, and we have to know how to reverse it. Socio-emotional attention is important for all types of students, but in digital or remote environments, more attention needs to be paid. The Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Sousa said that the virus is a pedagogue who is trying to tell us something. Listening to students is a first step in understanding what it is saying to us. All the data that we are able to interpret through learning analytics will be welcome. A team of researchers from the UOC has developed an adaptive system called LIS, Learning Intelligence System, which includes an early warning function to alert teaching staff and students to the risks of failing a course. The system stores anonymized data and uses this data combined with algorithms based on artificial intelligence techniques to perform a predictive analysis of students' progress. The model works with a level of precision ranging from 60% at the start of the academic year, when there is a little information available about them, to almost 90% halfway through the semester. All students, regardless of the level of risk of failing, receive messages tailored to their situation, so they know how to improve the next activity. They can review some content or contact the teacher. It is only an example that we all can potentially become algorithmic universities, but qualitative data will also be necessary, and there is still a long way to go. Finally, the driver of fun that leads to engagement. We heard this word this morning. We all interact on social media platforms, and we like and share content that makes us laugh, entertain, smile, and appeal to our sense of humor. Gamification, but also extended realities, which includes technologies such as virtual reality, augmented reality, or mixed realities, make it possible to achieve immersive learning processes. Nielen and Kirchner, in their book, tell us that learning experiences should be effective. The student learns what is planned in the designated time. Efficient. To free up time and cognitive effort means an opportunity for greater depth. And enjoyable, which produces a sense of success and self-efficacy. The enjoyment, the utility, and the perception of ease of use are fundamental variables for the success of the implementation of these technologies. From my own experience, including gamification tools in virtual classrooms does not guarantee per se a successful learning experience. If you don't make the activity mandatory, many students won't even approach the serious game. On the other hand, once they play the game, the immersion in the experience is rewarding, useful to reinforce content on skills, and in addition, it provides them memorable moments of socialization. Social interaction is a key part of learning, and in online environments, it is important to guarantee spaces where the students, like Marina Garbagnati, can develop their own identity through which they can communicate, express themselves, interact, and of course, show their competence, progress, and the results of learning. In this sense, at the UOC, we offer, on the one hand, Folio is a portfolio tool based on WordPress, open, which can transcend virtual classrooms and which is linked to agoras that allow exchanges, discussions, and feedback both from teachers and classmates. The portfolio has the student develops throughout their studies can be published and displayed outside the UOC community so that employers can see evidence of their abilities. On the other hand, we have designed an assessment tool called Graph, which ends up generating a graphical competence report that can be shared on professional digital platforms and therefore reach a larger audience, go viral. Universities can increase their social impact, globalize it, thanks to information dissemination strategies, connecting with emotions, fun, and ensuring engagement. But often, those who take the initiative to spread the word are the students themselves, when they share their experience with the university through social networks. At the UOC, we have some cases of influencers who study with us and spontaneously publish content about their experience in our in our virtual classroom. We cannot underestimate their power. And there are innovative opportunities to bring the university in general closer to new audiences regarding the viral scene. I especially like the tribute Twitter account in honor of the physicist Dr. Feynman. The post with value content, emotional insights, and humor sense inspire teachers and learners and demonstrate that the ways of sharing knowledge are mutating. So I assume from this provocative stance that the social impact of every single university must be well communicated and can go viral, reaching exponentially every corner of the planet. Online and distance universities have an advantage because their natural environment is not within brick and mortar walls, but digital. Returning to the initial thread of this presentation, I will ask you the last question. Are teachers like a virus? My answer is that we cannot continue growing professionally without connecting with others, teachers, without sharing and feeding provocations that help us design the next normal in higher education landscape. Environments such as this Congress are ideal spaces for this type of contagion, but we can continue to reinfect ourselves in other landscapes and, of course, social networks. Here is my contact information. Sharing is caring. Take care and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we don't have time for questions, but that was a really provocative and interesting approach to considering universities post-COVID. Fabulous analogy. Sylvia will be here, so people can catch up with her maybe over drinks later. But I'd like to ask, thank you once again, Sylvia, but I'd like to ask my panel to come and join me on the platform, please. So I have, I'm expecting Michael Murphy, Josie Fraser, Petras Parciades, Chiara Gemma. I hope I got that right. Anywhere, wherever you would like to sit. I think I'm missing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll proceed. We're one short, but I think we'll be okay to go ahead. I think there'll be plenty that my colleagues on here can talk about. So I'm going to kick this session off by inviting not Josie, because she's already talked a little bit about her thinking around the post-COVID world. But I am going to move on to Petras Parciades, who is the rector of the University of Cyprus, Open University in Cyprus, and I'm going to ask you just to say a few words by way of introduction, and you're allowed to lose your mask up here if you wish to.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
And I'm going to talk. You can tell me. Well, thank you for this opportunity. I know we're going to have cocktails in a while, so I've changed my title to look like Searching for the Right Leadership Cocktail Mix During the COVID Era. And we've heard a lot from very distinguished colleagues. One of them is on the panel. Michael described the context in which we are all operating very eloquently. Open, engaging with society. Focus, and I found that interesting, on learning and teaching. Usually we say teaching and learning, so he reversed it. I don't know if that was by accident or by design. However, it sounded good. And then Josie said we all become distance learners. And then I very much enjoyed the empirical research that was presented. I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the lady professor from Leuven. Very much so. So they all walked us through different continents of what they are operating now under the duress we're all facing. Having said that, about a year ago, I was elected rector of my own university. And by profession, I'm a professor of educational leadership. So I thought, what a beautiful opportunity to blend reality, praxis, with my theorizing and research so far. Well, it didn't prove to be very easy, but I tried to preach and see the praxis besides the theory that I was trying to live with for so many years. Having said that, what is the role of leaders nowadays in this age and era in which we are all asked to operate? Well, not an easy chore. And indeed, we are living in very difficult situations. It is like a balancing act or a greasy pole. Wherever you touch, you may fall, and when you fall, it hurts. So, what I try to do is put this into practice. It's a leadership model that we developed together with a German colleague of mine and good friend, Stefan Braukmann, about 13, 14 years ago. We've been validating, we're still investigating it, and I thought, okay, when I start as leader at my university, I will have to be both pedagogical or instructional, both participative in nature, both try for the personnel development, and try for the entrepreneurial as well as putting some structure within the university. So all five together, however, depending on the situation, a juggling act, if you will, depending what I was faced with, then where I would give more emphasis, and therefore trying to create my own leadership cocktail mix. And each time I keep changing it now for the past year. Having said that, two kept coming up. I will not ask questions, you've already been asked too many questions, but I will say the two of the 5 leadership domains that I shared with you kept coming up irrespective of context, which is very interesting because usually context is very important on how we do business on the ground. Well, it was, let me go back, it was the entrepreneurial and the pedagogical kept coming. So I thought, okay, with my friend Braukmann, we developed, or we're working now in the past few years on edupreneurial leadership, meaning that we have to be edupreneurial leaders in this age and era, in the COVID era, which was described so eloquently by a lot of turbulence, a lot of paradoxes that we have to live with. So, what we need to do as entrepreneurial leaders, scan and influence the environment, both the internal and the external. Provide a good diagnosis of our personnel, find out, and then be flexible to utilize those leadership domains and hybrids. Thus, depending on our personality, on our education and training in leadership, coupled with the experience and common sense that we have, then the levels of success or lack thereof that our organization is functioning at, and then how risk-averse or how risk-prone we are, well, let's try to become the entrepreneurial leadership, meaning the educational and the entrepreneurial. Those were the two that kept coming up and will continue coming up. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that as the external environment becomes fluid, uncertain, and full of paradoxes, the notion of becoming more entrepreneurial seems to be like a one-way street. There's no other way to survive both COVID, but also what's up in store for all of us in the university settings. Thus, in short, we're being asked constantly to do more with less and do it better by aligning the inner and the outer world of organizations of our universities. In essence, what we are after is to influence the outside environment through being entrepreneurials. At the same time, we need to influence the inside environment by being pedagogues, or learning and teaching, putting them together. That's what we are all about. Thus, in order to stimulate the development process by creating a community of shared responsibility between the internal stakeholders and the external. And indeed, sometimes we are really confused as to who the internals are and who the externals are. But we need to decipher and make decisions about that as well. So what about the leadership cocktail mix? Well, as everything, there is no best cocktail of school leadership mix for all school leaders. In essence, one size does not fit all. But all styles or domains are necessary under different situational, contextual, and ecological situations and conditions. Thus, the search for the Holy Grail goes on. I'm not sure we will ever find the right balance, and actually, when I was dean of my faculty, I thought I found the right leadership cocktail mix, but indeed, when I became rector, the cocktail mix had to change altogether. So I'm still improvising and playing around. At least, however, we do have the ingredients that will go into it. However, how much of each is enough under the circumstances we're all facing, that's up to each one of us to develop for himself or herself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petros. I was wondering if it was a bit risky to talk about cocktails when we're the only thing between the audience and drinks, but but I do want to say that that could be a very interesting discussion for the rectors' meeting tomorrow, to think about the leadership in our organisations. So a good provocation, I think, really helpful. I'm going to start this panel off. I want to throw it open to the audience, so it's open mic time, and I hope you've got lots of questions. But what I'd like to do to start off with is just to ask each of my panel members to say, what is the one most important thing that COVID has taught you about our experience in higher education? Just one. I'm sure there's hundreds, but I think the one most important thing. And Josie, would you like to go first? Oh, we've not got enough microphones, but...
Yeah, one thing is really difficult. I think, based on a conversation I just had with a colleague, actually, while we were having our coffee break, the one thing that is going to stick in my mind about managing the Open University through the COVID crisis is probably just how rapidly and effectively we could make big decisions with a small group of people when we really needed to. And that is not something I would say that we do particularly well in business as usual necessarily. I love the fact that we're a very discursive, thoughtful, collegiate organisation. It's one of the reasons I love working at the OU. But sometimes things take a really long time to happen because there are so many groups and interested parties, internal and external, that you have to discuss and negotiate with. But when we needed to make decisions rapidly, actually, the group that we pulled together was not a group of exec colleagues. It was a group that took a cross-section through the university of people with key insight and responsibilities. It included students, it included staff that were on the front line doing tutoring, it included people who chaired committees that would normally deal with exceptions or regulations or quality assurance. And it included some of our operational teams and their managers. And we just met weekly and figured out whatever we needed to figure out. And then we had the communications team also had a member who then figured out who needed to know and who we were going to tell. And I chaired that group. It was such a collegiate, it was almost inspiring just how quickly we could make decisions if we had the right people in the room and we were all trying to get where we needed to get to for the students and the staff. So I would love to see us learn from the fluidity that we could apply for future decision making. And I don't think that's going to be easy, but I really hope we can.
Thank you, Josie. I think that's really interesting, and it's fascinating what a burning platform can do. But you can't live like that all the time. So,
no.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to turn to you and ask if you can give me your top piece of learning, your top one learning from COVID. You can have more than one if you like,
well,
but only one to start with.
Thank you, Liz. I guess the first thing that I could say is that I said to myself many times, thank God, Allah or Yahweh or whoever, I am not a rector anymore. So that means that my main piece of learning comes from second hand, which is from our student children at the time. I saw the value of training and competence assurance, of teaching. We certainly need to reflect upon it now as we go back to the new normal, and where there is undoubtedly going to be, and should be, a much greater reliance on digital learning. It is absolutely vital that all university systems in Europe embrace competence assurance in teaching and learning. Partly, I suppose, because I have a medical background myself and know the importance of competence assurance to ensure trust among our citizens. The very same should apply to higher education. And I would really implore serving rectors and ministries and the Commission to invest in, but insist on competence assurance in teaching and learning, particularly in the digital space. In all spaces, but especially this now, given its importance.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Thank you. I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I think, well, not me, but many of my colleagues who have students who are children who are students would actually reach very similar conclusions. I'm not saying that that's necessarily in our own institutions, but in institutions where perhaps the traditional methods have held sway for a long time and there's not been any incentive to change. So I think that the incentive that COVID has given us and the observations that we've been able to make as a result of COVID are probably making that really clear for us. So, great point. Petros, I'm going to ask you, you can have another one besides your leadership mix, so your one big piece of learning.
Yeah, I wrote two actually, two words. Patience and trust. Patience and trust in the process and in the people, more than ever. Even if I see them physically in front of me, or if I don't see them, I have to be patient and I have to trust the process. I must say, personally speaking, I'm not a very patient person. However, I'm still working on it.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I guess there's quite a lot of us who are working in higher education who have experienced some of the glacial progress, should we say, in some areas, and sometimes we blame governance. But I've always argued that we make the rules, so we have the power to change the rules, and I think that's an important lesson to remember, and something that I think COVID has shown me quite often when I've heard people saying, but we can't do that because it's written down here, or we can't do that because we've never done it this way before. And I say, show me where it's written down, or, well, somebody wrote it ages ago, so unwrite it. You know, we have the power to change things. So sometimes a little bit of impatience is quite useful. But I absolutely agree on trust, definitely. So we do have to trust people, we have to trust our colleagues, and we have to trust our students. And this is making us think about it in a whole set of different ways. So I'm going to throw it open now to the audience for questions or comments. We can have a discussion or a Q&A, whichever you would like. So, Klaus-Dieter. It's fortunately the one person who put his hand up, I knew his name. I'm not going to be able to do the same for everybody.
So it's Klaus-Dieter Wasada, I'm the Open University. I like what you said about trust and patience, absolutely. On the other hand, one of the key features of the pandemic was that it created a sense of urgency. And while we don't want to have a pandemic back, I would love to see a sense of urgency in those decisions that we need to take, be it digital education, online assessment, you name it. And does the panel have any idea how we can create a sense of urgency that we all feel without a pandemic impact?
Great question. Who would like to go? Petra is going to go first.
I can say something that I've already tried, it works. Created, either pulling people from the outside telling you what's going on. Like I've heard people from the University of Catalonia here that I've never heard before, you know, this storytelling kind of presentation that I very much enjoyed. Well, bring people like that to create that sense of urgency. Already from the many keynotes we have heard today, I got some ideas that when I go back I'll try. So outsiders, bringing them in, you know, and in a sense creating this kind of urgency. The other is of course a pandemic, or call it differently, but it is a pandemic, you know what I mean. And then try to operate on it. And you can also create that. The other is also from the grounds, you know, it comes. They keep telling you there's a lot of bureaucracy. And as Josie said, we had to make decisions during the uncertainty and still keep making them. And as Liz beautifully put it, if it's not written down that it's prohibited, then I say it's allowed. And I told the people, trust the process, it's allowed for you too if it's allowed for me. So we operate on that. It's dangerous, I must say, and it's risk. A lot of risk-taking, but it works. So those would be my views. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
The only thought I have that might be useful is to remind people daily that there will be another pandemic, and it could be in 2 years' time. We have no idea. In fact, we can say that it is more likely to occur far earlier than the historic trajectory of pandemics. Bear that in mind. And I would suggest the following, another thought, the heading of this was reflections. I've been sitting reflecting. We need to very quickly embrace a culture of randomized controlled trials of the things that we did during the pandemic, because we need the evidence as quickly as possible that what we adopted on an emergency basis actually do deliver what we think they're delivering. Again, it's a bit of a medical hang-up, I suppose, but I spent 25, 30 years meeting patients, and you always had to have the answer to the question, how do you know that what you are recommending or what you are doing is actually producing benefit? We've got to start doing that, and we have 20 million students, well, 20 million full-time students within the EU, and I haven't counted outside the EU within Europe. We have a huge asset. We have 2 million academic staff within the EU alone. We have the assets, if we could just mobilize people, to do randomized controlled trials like Annelise was describing from Leuven earlier on all the various interventions that we had adopted. So, next pandemic could be soon.
I don't know how I follow. Let's look for the next pandemic. For me, it's about just reminding people what we did and what we achieved and how rapidly we could make progress and how securely we did that, actually, because it felt risky. I think, you know, to Petros's point, to operate in that way feels more risky. It is more risky. But actually, when you've got very experienced staff that you trust, and you make sure there's sufficient people in the room, you can make decisions fast and you can move things forward. So we've got some evidence of it working. We've got some evidence that we don't necessarily need a 60-page paper, that a 2-page briefing note is fine, as long as it's followed up with a good discussion, and collecting the evidence to check where you've got to, and being willing to change your mind if it doesn't work. And I think that's quite a scary lesson for leaders, actually. You know, it's quite difficult to ask somebody who's leading an organisation to say, yeah, we tried it, didn't work, we're doing this now. That's not a very comfortable position to be in as a leader. So I think it's going to change what we look for. We're going to look for more flexibility in people that are making the decisions in our organisations. And I think if you have flexible people in the leadership, it's easier to react to things with urgency, because you can be clear why it's urgent, what's created the need to do something, and then you can be clear that it's okay to take some risks, because you will look at the evidence afterwards and you'll change your mind if you need to.
Thank you. That's a very good question, Klaus-Dieter. Anybody else have a question or a comment for our panel? You've all gone very quiet. I'm blaming Petros for mention of cocktails, but I should say, Alessandra's walking purposefully across the room, so I hope there's somebody at the end of that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Valk from Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. I very much like what you're saying about professional development of teachers, looking at what we're doing with the curriculum monitoring, quality assurance, all these things. And when I hear you speaking, I'm thinking of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm thinking specifically of the one on quality education, which tells us to look at these dimensions. So as university leaders, I understand that your role is actually one of risk-taking if you are to enact, this kind of transformative, the transformative leadership we need to transform our practices. And when I say we, I mean, the teachers, the students, the admin staff, all the people that are working within our institutions. So, digitalization is obviously, a huge concern, and should be integrated into the professional development of teachers, but alongside all those other things that that we're supposed to be struggling with, I don't know, interprofessional learning, entrepreneurship, ethics, all these things, which are actually, in a way siloed in our institutions, and therefore call on the time of our teaching staff, place huge demands on them. So what are your thoughts of how do we transform this so that instead of having all these different competing agendas for teachers' times, that we may find a more integrated approach to, you know, all these things, which I'd like to call more quality education, right? So how do we make sure that the demands on our teaching staff's time are reasonable, sustainable, responsible?
I think that's a really, really good question. I don't know, Michael was nodding all the way through, so but I'll go to Josie because to take it by surprise. So,
surprise is always good. It is a great question. So, before I joined the OU, I was at more conventional campus-based university and introduced a program where we broke down all the silos in a big department and made everybody team teach everything. And it was to deliver a sort of transformative pedagogy for the students in healthcare education, healthcare profession education, to get them working and thinking in teams right from day one of their education. And it had lots of interesting effects. I could talk about it all day, but I won't. Actually, one of the unexpected things that was really interesting to me was how much it shifted some of my personal workload as a senior lecturer in a team, working in team teaching environments and team program leadership and team quality assurance, because there was no one person who could check this exam script had been marked correctly because everything had been integrated. And I think we've got to get better at, many of us become academics because we've got a narrow interest in a particular specialism in a research area. But then I think a lot of colleagues that become more teaching-focused academics, we get stimulation from the range of things that we're thinking about and opening students' eyes to. And I think we have to think quite carefully about how we manage people who have focuses in those different areas actually quite differently, because they often have quite different needs. There are, of course, exceptions and people who like all the pieces of the academic work, but with people that are teaching-focused, I think making sure that we have models for teaching, models for quality assurance that provide a supportive framework. And then I think we need to use an American expression that I particularly like, we need to drink some of our own Kool-Aid. You know, why aren't we using micro-credentials to train our staff? If we can make bite-sized qualifications that help people focus on how you do accessible teaching, why aren't we saying everybody should get, you know, time to do a micro-credential every year and we should be paying for it, and that's their professional development. It helps them create a community of practice. They can do it with people in other institutions, build that network. So I think some of it is about us thinking more creatively about our teaching staff as students and professional development skills as well.
Josie, Petra.
On top of what Josie said, for which I thoroughly agree, and that was really a very good comment, I think we should more actively encourage experimentation in the classroom, and that can be done, especially through what we call classroom observation, and I have encouraged our lecturers to do that. Even now, especially during the pandemic, you know, they get into the classroom just like any other regular student, and they confer with the professor and do this peer observation. That helps a lot for growth. And we have structured instruments which they utilize in order to do that, so that we focus in particular areas of the teaching, maybe how you create a climate, how you make some advanced organizers, you know, to get the students enthusiastic. How do you provide closure? How do you provide variety within so they don't get bored of you? So there's a lot of things. And then, through this active experimentation encouragement, and then through observations with each other and making it like a collective culture of your school, department, university, that this is how we do business here. You'll see a lot of personal growth and professional growth and thus create those communities of learning that we're all after.
Thank you. Michael, did you want to come?
I'm just I would agree with both colleagues and Petra's point, though I do think, Petra, that experimentation should take place in a controlled fashion so that there is formal, reliable, valid learning from that expectation, and that it's designed to be done in such a way that it can be shared with others subsequently. I think if you're going to experiment in such an important facet of other people's lives, their learning experience, then it is important that it is done in a controlled way to maximize the learning from it. And to Josie's point, I think, and responding to the Karolinska comment, this is all about continuing professional development, which, in my view, should not remain a voluntary matter, as it is in many universities, in many countries in Europe still, surprisingly. It should, every university should have a teaching and learning development and support unit. And participation should not be mandatory, perhaps, although in some countries it is, but it certainly should be incentivized, for example, through the reward system, whether it be a promotion system within the university sector. So CPD should be a feature of everybody's life in the university sector. Ideally, 3% of the revenue, the budget, should be spent on continuing development of staff. So yes, I agree with both my colleagues, and just add a few nuanced points.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, really, really good question, provoking some thoughts from the panel. I think we've got time for one more. Just over there.
Oh yeah, you can't give it to me, that's right. Earlier you applauded the initiative of KU Leuven, of the KULA campus, for being innovative and having these efforts to continue innovations, but small, and that should be happening from now on. There should be room for quick and small innovation. Now, quite recently I've sat with several people from several universities in the Netherlands, and everybody feels this way, that this should be able, and I'm asking you for a solution because we didn't really have one, we got stuck. We looked at the process needed for innovation, and every teacher that wants, given that they have time, that wants to do innovation, then comes into this difficult, they have to jump all these, I don't know how you say it, but they go through all these loops to be able to do their innovation, talking to privacy officers, going through the loopholes of the buying department that needs to talk to them. So there's a very complicated process that needs to be followed. Do you have any ideas how you would change that difficult process to enable these small innovations in your institutes?
Thank you. I think that's been a priority for very many of us, how to improve that innovation flow within our organisations. I think personally, one of the biggest challenges is financial resource, because quite often these things cost money and then you have to prioritise. But in terms of getting the ideas out and getting those into fruition, I think that there are potentially things that we can learn about. So I don't know whether, I'm looking at my panel to see if there's anybody who wants to hazard a go.
We've been doing a bit of thinking about innovation at the OU. I think colleagues like to think of us as a disruptive organisation where academics are encouraged to try things with teaching and evaluate. Evaluation's critical. So one of the things that we've done in recent years is set up scholarship centres in each of the faculties. So what that's allowed the faculties to do is allocate some budget to the kind of scholarship of teaching and learning projects that maybe would be unlikely to attract external grant funding because they're localised and they're experimental. but to have a mechanism where those projects can be supported, people can be given some time in their workload, some budget. They're not expensive projects, but having a central pot of money in each faculty to deliver that work has, I think, proven to be a really good mechanism for supporting innovation and experimentation. Excuse me, the challenge is going to be how and when we scale it up. So there's lots of things in those projects that deliver really good ideas and they're evaluated. So we've started to have conferences and internal and external conversations. So for example, the Science, Technology, Engineering and Maths faculty have been hosting a national UK-wide STEM teaching conference, and some of those scholarship projects then get disseminated more widely across the sector as well as within the team. And we've also had from faculty to faculty conversations and conferences. So I think that is helping in terms of teaching innovation. It wouldn't help so much in some of the other sorts of innovation that you might want to experiment with, where it might be about changing a physical space or creating a new room that allows you to deliver something different, as we saw in Leuven, where there's obviously been a big investment in the technology and the estate to make it possible. I think that's a more challenging question, because those tend to be higher budget, so you would probably want more confidence that it was going to be something that was used and used effectively and matches best practice, etc., before you'd make those kinds of investments. But certainly for localised scholarship, sharing of best practice and developing new ideas, that having a scholarship fund and a small support team in each faculty has been working very well at the OU, I think. It only addresses some of the problem, but it addresses that very well. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, again, I keep complimenting Josie and Petra. Just to say, from the traditional, my experience in traditional campus, the starting point is strong leadership from the President, Rector's, Vice Chancellor office to ensure that there is a culture of innovation in learning and teaching, as much as research historically has been celebrated. That's the parity of esteem comment I made earlier in the afternoon. So that's where it starts. Secondly, the incentives, and you've just mentioned some of them. Even a simple innovation, such as celebrating the innovative teachers of the year within the institution. Because I bet most of your universities have research awards recognizing the most successful grant winners and Nature paper publishers. There has to be the same, exactly the same recognition of learning and teaching. And a third point is that, and just extending Josie's comment, incorporating the innovative ideas into the upskilling of the staff, encouraging staff to take, maybe certificates or diplomas or masters in learning and teaching within the institution, and using these ideas as the research elements of that program. So I think we're ad idem conceptually in this.
Yeah. Petra, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a short comment to try to complement my two colleagues. Indeed, when I heard the awards and best teachers, etc., we instituted this process. Initially, I heard various comments from my colleagues. You're being an elitist, or I don't want to vote for this, or I'm not involved. We decided to cut it short, to make it a voluntary process. Whoever one of our tutors is willing to share why that makes him or her unique as a teacher, innovator, whatever. And then they start putting together their portfolio. We put the criteria down on a voluntary basis. That goes from programmatic decision making, it goes to faculty. The faculty eliminates 2 persons or 3 persons that they think are the top. And then this goes to the Senate, and the Senate votes on 1 person from each faculty, and they're given during our awards ceremony for the diplomas for the students we give for each person from the faculty the award for best teacher, whatever. I still hear comments, negative as well as positive, but it's okay. The process is voluntary, so they accepted that part, and I think it is working. And then those people are making a showcase of why what they do is so innovative, so student attractive, you know, so stimulating, and makes them such good teachers.
And a final point, if I might, because it brings me back again to something I said earlier, academic career assessment has to change within the university sector. And this is one clear example of ensuring that teaching, learning, innovation is rewarded in the promotion process and in the appointment process of new staff, formally. That then will drive implementation.
Thank you. There's some really good advice there. My tip is seek forgiveness afterwards rather than try and ask permission first. Don't tell Josie I said that. But sometimes you get your really best innovations by just sneaking them through the back door.
Yeah.
So,
what I didn't say when I gave the example of innovating in my previous organisation and doing transformative teaching and assessment was we did break about 5 of the university systems, but nobody realised we were going to break them until we'd already done it. So I probably am an advocate of the seek forgiveness, not permission approach myself.
okay, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much to my panel for being fantastic, and thank you all for your questions and for... Thank you.
Thank you.
Alessandra's going like this, so work it out.
It's your leadership cocktail.
Yeah.
Recording stopped.